Okay, I'm going to do a couple of short tutorials that are just going over some of the materials workflows um, that we'll be covering in class 4 that are hard to remember out of hand. So it's stuff I don't want you to have to kind of grasp for. So I wanted some quick by the numbers tutorials to get you through. So let's start off with creating materials for your mesh. Um, so far we've been working largely in the solid sort of viewport preview mode. So these options here are the viewport, different kinds of viewport shading. This one is the wireframe, and here's a solid. You just see the individual vertices and edges and stuff like that. Oh, and we also might have our X-ray on or off, depending on what we're doing. So X-ray, you see through it, so you can grab things or see things on inside. This is a solid mode that we've been using most of the time. We also have our materials mode, so we're seeing the material, and as you start out, you have no material assigned. And materials are pretty much what you need to create. You need to define some kind of material. It's like the surface, the way the surface is handled. And if you define a material, you can do everything from establish a color for your object to create translucency or metallic reflectiveness. You can create textures on top of it. You can bring in external, photographic imagery to map to the mesh and that kind of stuff. So materials are where it's at and what you need to do in order to get color, some kind of surface variation on top of what you manage with sculpting. So here, the final viewport option is the render preview. And now, as you go through, I actually forgot to switch back to the default render engine. So if you go to this here render properties, you can see the render engine it's using. And by default, you have this newer render like real-time renderer, as they're calling it, Eevee, which is great. It's very quick. You have a nice sort of estimate of what the render is going to look like without too much mucking about. It doesn't handle it, like it's really quick and straight to the point. It doesn't handle a lot of bouncing reflected light as effectively. It doesn't create those stunning, beautifully illuminated images as well as Cycles does. And Cycles is great, but it's kind of it's slower. You see all this noise, and that's really the amount of noise that slowly resolves itself as you linger over an image. That's kind of established by how much the kind of rendering detail you're going to add, the sampling. So Cycles is great for the final render, but Eevee's a lot speedier while you're working. So I encourage you to go back and forth. As you're working with materials, it really is about kind of trying to find what the ultimate best look and appearance of your model is going to be. And sometimes it helps to go into Cycles to just see what that outcome will look like. Eevee doesn't always give you the results that you're wanting to achieve. If you have a lot of translucency or something, Cycles is much better. So to start a material, go into the materials panel down here, material properties, and you can click, either click this to create a new item or just hit this. Either way, you'll have to hit new material, name it what you want, and you can have multiple materials associated with any mesh. And those, you can also assign different groups of vertices, a different material, but if your point is to have color variation within your head, there's a more direct way to do that, really. But here you are. We'll go. There's all these different settings, and we'll go through some of the most important settings that you'll find here. Starting with nodes are important. We'll talk about nodes later on in the class. There's also a nice little preview here that'll show you what a simpler object with your material is going to look like. So that's nice to have open some of the time, especially if you're having a slowed down kind of real-time rendering process because you have a really complex situation. Then you can have this quick mock-up of what it's going to look like. The first thing to look at is the actual kind of surface that you're going to have. And by default, it's principled BDSF, and this is a newer kind of material. and it actually encapsulates or it incorporates all of the different variables or properties that are options for you with all of these other presets. You have like your glossies, your hair, your mixers, your tunes. There's a lot of different material setups that you would have used in the past to get a basic look. What else do we have? Translucent, and play around. But ultimately, yeah, Principled BDSF it gives you the greatest range of options. So after this setting here, we're going to skip down to base color, and this is where you actually get to see some kind of a change in the surface quality of your object, and the sky's the limit here, right? Under that we have subsurface scattering amount. Now that's going to tell you how much it mixes with the subsurface color down here at the bottom. So this is something that you went through with the Blender Guru, but subsurface scattering is the amount of kind of translucency in the surface, and it's great for for human flesh, for something like that. When I realized that I need to go back to the light source in order to show you this. So one moment here. Here's my light source. Move that in the right place. I changed things to sun. We'll talk about the light source in a bit, but let's take a look at this simply lit setup. Going back to our material properties here, subsurface scattering. If I was to create a human, there would be certain situations where the skin becomes, is sort of translucent. Under the right lighting conditions, you see a little bit of a redness from the underlying blood. So the more of the subsurface scattering I add to my form, it's a lot, maybe too much. You'll see the underlying red mixes more and more strongly with the top level color, and maybe I'll do something that's closer to flesh tone for the top here. Okay, and change the mixing a little bit, and eventually you're gonna have this really nice. I mean, you see this kind of nice, soft, kind of waxy translucency. In the Blender Guru video, you're actually adding this to the icing. Oops. But you can see here that when you have the right lighting situation, let me rotate this a little bit. Point this one direction here. Not rotating. I'm doing this. Okay. Where's my rotation? Am I not a point? I'm a point. That's right, I don't have a direction. I'm a point. Okay. But you can see here, there's a little bit of translucency. I'm picking up the redness here more and more strongly. Shade smooth. Looks a little wonky, but you get the point. Subsurface scattering. Is what I'm dealing with there. So next up I have this feature, metallic. Do I want this to be a metallic object or not a metallic object? And as I've been told that that it really only has a big impact if I'm going all the way to 1 or all the way down to 0. And turn off the subsurface scattering. Yeah, you can kind of see the sheen here. Oops, I don't want to move that around too much. The lighting, it's going to make a huge difference here. And for things like metallic images, anything that's going to have like reflectivity or something like that, it really helps to have things for the light to bounce off of. So for things like that, it would be nice to actually add a plane to bounce the light off of. I'm going to scale it up a little bit and give that its own material. And yeah, let things bounce a bit. So with Eevee, you don't see as much, bouncing of light. But if you switch the render engine to Cycles, you're going to see the kind of reflected light off of that surface a lot more clearly. So you see that metallic quality. So I'm just showing you examples. You don't have to follow along with all this stuff. So metallic or non-metallic. And I'm going to turn that down. The next setting we have is, I'm going to go back to Eevee for now, is specular. So specular is really the glossiness of the object. But here's glossy, so specular. So once you turn that all the way up, you can see a little bit of sheen on in the highlights. See that? Specular tint. Not worth talking about in our situation. The next up, which is important, is roughness, and roughness is really the roughness of the object. It really affects any of the reflectivity. So if a thing is metallic, let's turn down our specularity, turn up the metallic all the way. So it looks kind of shiny, but not really. The roughness affects things like translucency, shininess, and that kind of thing. Now it actually becomes kind of strange in Eevee. With no roughness, it kind of disappears, this glow. And so now again, it's not so clear until I get into Cycles how that reflectivity of the metallic body really starts to take hold in Cycles. So the roughness will add kind of absorption of things. So you can kind of turn that up or down, the quality. And as we add more light sources and as we add a kind of environment for the light to bounce off of, it's really going to have an impact. So I guess one other thing I should add to this, for the sake of showing you the range of things, because it becomes a kind of unconvincing or impressive display of metallicness. So let me just show you one other thing. Other than the render engine, we also have this. We have all these kind of universal settings. I'm going to go to the world setting, and instead of just having a background color for my surface, whoops, I'm going to click here and do a environment texture, and I'm going to get into this. I'm going to go into my pictures, and what did I add before? Set a nice environment. Well, it's going to be nice and green. There are these special HDR images that are like 360-degree images that are great for your backgrounds. But in the case of, in case you're, you kind of don't necessarily need all that detail and perfection. If you just want a nice image to map to the space that you can rotate around, this can be enough. So now you have something for this reflective object to actually reflect. So you can just see some of that. Turn down the roughness, and I should be able to get some nice reflection. Look at that, pretty, huh? And let me actually turn my lamp back into a sun. A sun is nice for just getting the best the best lighting. It's probably too high. Just here. So there's a lot of settings you can add, but with a couple of tweaks here and there, you can just get such a stunning range of surfaces here. And let's go back to Eevee. Should at this point even be giving us some good real-time rendering feedback. Let's see what it does. Yeah, so that's beautiful in Eevee as well. You don't see as much reflected light from that surface, but it is picking up the reflection from our environment. So look at that beautiful metallic quality. Okay, I'm really wowed by all this. By the is it simple? No, but it's stunning when you get it. Let me turn that specularity to have an effect. Not too much in our metallic kind of environment here. Okay, so they got the roughness. Turn up the roughness, you get more of a burnished bronze kind of thing. Anyway, you be the judge. Next up, none of these have a lot of effect in my daily life. The clear coat is another way to add. Turn this back down. Turn down my metallic. The clear coat is another way to add some sheen. There we go. It adds a little bit of sheen in a. It's going really slow now. A different way. But you know, I find that the specularity is really what does the trick in terms of glossiness. You can see the clear coat. It adds a kind of like, adds a kind of glossy surface to the whole thing. But, another important thing is actually transmission, which allows you to have translucency or true transparency, like I think a glass object or something like that. So it looks pretty good here. That's like total translucency with a little bit of roughness. If you turn the roughness all the way down, you have something like water, and really water will have probably a little bit of maybe not color to it, depending on what kind of water. Let's even go to cycles, and you'll see it'll do a little bit better job getting that translucency. It might take a minute. Well, that's really picking up a lot of the surrounding color. So when you're actually doing water and having it automate some of the particle or the physics of water, or particle physics or something, you can have truly translucent things, like the water in the water glass, that kind of stuff. You can really go to town. So a material like that would be handled the same way. You just have to kind of tweak things as you see fit. I think that's all I wanted to talk about at this point. There's emission, like how much light it casts. It actually casts from itself, and those are the basics of the materials that I wanted to talk about in this first section. I think the next section is going to be the texture painting. So I'll just stop here. There's a lot to play around with for this first part. Just imagine it's metallic or water, floating water, its sentience in my garden landscape. Pretty exciting to me. So next up, texture painting.